Prepare yourself for a chronicle of suffering so intense it chills the soul. Imagine an entire nation held hostage, forced to bleed its resources for a greedy king's ego. Rubber wasn't the currency here, it was human lives. The forced labor beyond cruel, and failure to meet quotas became death sentences, met with the grim punishments of amputations of the human hands and the legs on a daily basis for the economic rewards of sadistic soldiers. This is the story of the Congo Free State, where King Leopold II built his fortune on the backs of the Congolese at large, squeezing their lives into rubber sap, their screams into ivory trinkets. The Congo had become an industrial slaughterhouse, churning out human misery for profit. The systematic dehumanization that swallowed millions, fathers, mothers, and even children, were not spared. Today, we are taking a dive at the grim punishments in the Congo Free State under King Leopold II. Before we continue, don't forget to support our works by hitting that like button on your screen. Share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to keep the channel growing. The Congo Free State, also known as the Independent State of the Congo, was once a private possession owned by King Leopold II of Belgium from 1885 to 1908. King Leopold II became interested in the region during Sir Henry Morton Stanley's exploration of the Congo River between 1874 and 1887. Leopold's claim to the vast region, approximately one-third the size of the continental United States, was established in the 1880s as the private holding of a group of European investors headed by the king. In November 1877, Leopold formed the Committee for Studies of the Upper Congo to open the African interior to European trade along the Congo River. Between 1879 and 1882, Stanley, working for Leopold and the European investors, established stations on the Upper Congo, where he opened negotiations with local rulers. By 1884, the Association of Internationale du Congo had signed treaties with 450 independent African entities. Based on these treaties, it then asserted its right to govern all the territories comprising the Congo Free State. During the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where European nations partitioned the African continent, the region was officially named the Congo Free State, and the conference recognized Leopold, who had long held ambitions for colonial expansion, as its sole owner. Leopold, the only European to be granted private ownership of an African territory, in turn promised to bring civilization to the people in the area as his main goal. The territory under Leopold's control exceeded 2.6 million kilometers square. Amid financial problems, it was directed by a tiny cadre of administrators drawn from across Europe. Initially, the quasi-colony proved unprofitable and insufficient, with the state always close to bankruptcy. The boom in demand for natural rubber, which was abundant in the territory, created a radical shift in the 1890s. To facilitate the extraction and export of rubber, all vacant land in the Congo was nationalized, with the majority distributed to private companies as concessions. Some were kept by the state. By the early 1890s, under Leopold's rule, the Congo Free State would become notorious for its cruel treatment of the Congolese. These atrocities were particularly associated with the labor policies enforced by colonial administrators, used to collect natural rubber, palm oil, and ivory for export. Between 1891 and 1906, the companies were allowed free rein to exploit the concessions, with the result being that forced labor and violent coercion were used to collect the rubber cheaply and maximize profit. The Free State's military force, the Force Publique, led by European officers in the employ of Leopold, enforced the labor policies. Individual workers who refused to participate in rubber collection could be killed, and entire villages razed. Another major cause of the population decline was disease, which was worsened by the social disruption caused by the atrocities of the Free State. A number of epidemics, notably African sleeping sickness, smallpox, swine influenza, and amoebic dysentery, ravaged indigenous populations. In 1901 alone, it was estimated that 500,000 Congolese had died from sleeping sickness. Disease, famine, and violence combined to reduce the birth rate, while excess deaths rose. Punishment methods, including beatings and lashings, were used to force harvest-gathering quotas to be met. Another form of punishment that was used by the force publique was the amputation of the hands of Congolese men, women, and even children if their rubber quotas were not met. The severing of workers' hands achieved particular international notoriety. These were sometimes cut off by force publique soldiers who were made to account for every shot they fired by bringing back the hands of their victims. These details were recorded by Christian missionaries working in the Congo and caused public outrage when they were made known in the United Kingdom, Belgium, the United States, and elsewhere. Combined with epidemic disease, famine, and falling birth rates caused by these disruptions, the atrocities contributed to a sharp decline in the Congolese population. The magnitude of the population fall over the period is disputed, with modern estimates ranging from 1.5 million to 13 million. In 1890, historian and journalist George Washington Williams, who traveled to the Congo Free State, first brought this exploitation to light when he wrote an open letter to Leopold about the suffering of the native inhabitants and the brutal treatment by Leopold's agents. Polish-British novelist Joseph Conrad, who visited the Congo Free State between 1890 and 1894, also brought attention to the mass atrocities on the Congolese people that he personally witnessed. He wrote what he saw in Heart of Darkness, which was first published in serialized form in Blackwood's magazine in 1899, and then became a best-selling novel in 1902. Leopold's reign over the Congo Free State, however, became infamous for its brutality. The people of the Congo were forced to labor for valued resources, including rubber and ivory, to personally enrich Leopold. Estimates vary, but about half the Congolese population died from punishment and malnutrition. Many more suffered from disease and torture. Among those who weren't killed, many were punished by having a hand and foot amputated or one out of both. The people of the Congo did not suffer these injustices without fighting back. Several rebellions were mercilessly put down under Leopold's direction. In addition, to facilitate economic extraction from the Free State, land was divided up under the so-called domain system, in other words called regime domanial, in 1891. All vacant land, including forests and areas not under cultivation, was decreed to be uninhabited and thus in the possession of the state, leaving many of the Congo's resources, especially rubber and ivory, under direct colonial ownership. Leopold kept 250,000 kilometers square of territory, known as the Crown Domain, in other words, Domaine de la Couronne, under personal rule, which was added to the territory he already controlled under the private domain, Domaine privé. Thus, most economic exploitation of the Congolese interior was undertaken by Leopold and the major concessionaires. The system was extremely profitable, and Abir made a turnover of over 100% on its initial stake in a single year. The king made 70 million Belgian francs profit from the system between 1896 and 1905. The Free State's concession system was soon copied by other colonial regimes, notably those in the neighboring French Congo. Now come, let's peer into this dark age to have a look at the atrocities inflicted on the people of the Congo Free State. 1. Red rubber system and forced labor. With the majority of the Free State's revenues derived from the export of rubber, a labor policy, known by critics as the red rubber system, was created to maximize its extraction. Labor was demanded by the administration as taxation. This created a slave society, as companies became increasingly dependent on forcibly mobilizing Congolese labor for their collection of rubber. The state recruited a number of black officials, known as capitas, to organize local labor. However, the desire to maximize rubber collection, and hence the state's profits, meant that the centrally enforced demands were often set arbitrarily, without considering the numbers or the welfare of workers. In the concessionary territories, the private companies which had purchased a concession from the Free State administration were able to use virtually any measures they wished to increase production and profits without state interference. The lack of a developed bureaucracy to oversee any commercial methods produced an atmosphere of informality throughout the state in regards to the operation of enterprises, which in turn facilitated abuses. Treatment of laborers, especially the duration of service, was not regulated by law and instead was left to the discretion of officials on the ground. Abir and the Anversois were particularly noted for the harshness with which their officials treated Congolese workers. The historian Jean Stengers described regions controlled by these two companies as veritable hells on earth. Rubber harvesters were usually compensated for their labor with cheap items, such as a cloth, beads, a portion of salt, or a knife. On one occasion, a customary chief who ordered his subjects to gather rubber was rewarded with slaves. Workers who refused to supply their labor were coerced with constraint and repression. Dissenters were beaten or whipped with the shikot. Hostages were taken to ensure prompt collection, and punitive expeditions were sent to destroy villages which refused. The policy led to a collapse of Congolese economic and cultural life, as well as farming in some areas. Much of the enforcement of rubber production was the responsibility of the force publique, the colonial military. The force had originally been established in 1885, with white officers and non-commissioned officers and black privates recruited from as far afield as Zanzibar, Nigeria, and Liberia. In the Congo, it recruited from specific ethnic and social demographics. These included the Bangala, and this contributed to the spread of the Lingala language across the country, and freed slaves from the eastern Congo. The so-called Zapo Zaps from the Songye ethnic group were the most feared. Reportedly, cannibals, the Zapo Zaps, frequently abused their official positions to raid the countryside for slaves. By 1900, the force publique numbered 19,000 men. In addition to the army, rubber companies employed their own militias, which often worked in tandem with the force publique to enforce their rule. The red rubber system emerged with the creation of the concession regime in 1891 and lasted until 1906, when the concession system was restricted. At its height, it was heavily localized in the Equateur, Bandundu, and Kasai regions. 2. Mutilation and brutality. Failure to meet the rubber collection quotas was punishable by death. Meanwhile, the force publique were required to provide the hand of their victims as proof when they had shot and killed someone, as it was believed that they would otherwise use the munitions, imported from Europe at considerable cost, for hunting or to stockpile them for mutiny. As a consequence, the rubber quotas were in part paid off in cut-off hands. A Catholic priest quotes a man, Swambe, speaking of the hated state official Léon Fievez, who ran a district along the river 500 kilometers north of Stanley Pool, now called Pool Malebo, the river serving as the border between the Republic of the Congo to the north and the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the south. One junior officer described a raid to punish a village that had protested. The officer in command ordered us to cut off the heads of the men and hang them on the village palisades, and to hang the women and the children on the palisade in the form of a cross. After seeing a Congolese person killed for the first time, a Danish missionary wrote, "The soldier said, 'Don't take this to heart so much. They kill us if we don't bring the rubber.' The commissioner has promised us, if we have plenty of hands, he will shorten our service. In Forbath's words, in theory, each right hand proved a killing. In practice, to save ammunition, soldiers sometimes cheated by simply cutting off the hand and leaving the victim to live or die. Several survivors later said that they had lived through a mass killing by acting dead, not moving even when their hands were severed, and waiting till the soldiers left before seeking help. In some instances, a soldier could shorten his service term by bringing more hands than the other soldiers, which led to widespread mutilations and dismemberment. Historian David Van Reybrouck stated that the photographs of mutilated people have created a misconception that dismemberment of the living was a widespread practice. He wrote that while dismemberment of the living did occasionally happen, the practice was not as systemic as often presented. John Stengers and Daniel van Groenewegen have also stated there was no systemic practice of dismembering living people as a punishment for not producing enough rubber. Most cases of dismemberment of the living were caused by soldiers who had shot people and had cut off their hands thinking they were dead while they were in fact still alive. 3. Prisons and hostage. Taking one practice used to force workers to collect rubber included taking wives and family members hostage. Leopold never proclaimed it an official policy, and Free State authorities in Brussels emphatically denied that it was employed. Nevertheless, the administration supplied a manual to each station in the Congo, which included a guide on how to take hostages to coerce local chiefs. The hostages could be men, women, children, elders, or even the chiefs themselves. Every state or company station maintained a stockade for imprisoning hostages. Abir agents would imprison the chief of any village which fell behind its quota. In July 1902, one post recorded that it held 44 chiefs in prison. These prisons were in poor condition, and the posts at Bongandanga and Mompono each recorded death rates of 3 to 10 prisoners per day in 1899. Persons with records of resisting ABIR were deported to forced labor camps. There were at least 3 such camps, one at Lereko, one on the upper Moringa River, and one on the upper Lapori River. 4. Wars and rebellions. Aside from rubber collection, violence in the Free State chiefly occurred in connection with wars and rebellions. Native states, notably Masiri's Yeki Kingdom, the Zonde Federation, and Swahili-speaking territory in the eastern Congo under slave trader Tipu Tip, refused to recognize colonial authority and were defeated by the force publique with great brutality during the Congo Arab War. In 1890, a military mutiny broke out among the Batatela in Kasai, leading to a 4-year insurgency. The conflict was particularly brutal and caused a great number of casualties. 5. Famine. The presence of rubber companies such as ABR exacerbated the effect of natural disasters such as famine and disease. ABR's tax collection system forced men out from the villages to collect rubber, which meant that there was no labor available to clear new fields for planting. This, in turn, meant that the women had to continue to plant worn-out fields, resulting in lower yields, a problem aggravated by company sentries stealing crops and farm animals. The post at Bonginda experienced a famine in 1899, and in 1900 missionaries recorded a terrible famine across Abir's concession. 6. Child colonies. Leopold sanctioned the creation of child colonies, in which orphaned Congolese would be kidnapped and sent to schools operated by Catholic missionaries in which they would learn to work or be soldiers. These were the only schools funded by the state. More than 50% of the children sent to the schools died of disease, and thousands more died in the forced marches into the colonies. In one such march, 108 boys were sent over to a mission school, and only 62 survived, 8 of whom died a week later. Labor of non-Congolese. Indigenous Congolese were not the only ones put to work by the Free State. 540 Chinese laborers were imported to work on railways in the Congo. However, 300 of them would die or leave their posts. Caribbean peoples and people from other African countries were also imported to work on the railway, in which 3,600 would die in the first 2 years of construction from railroad accidents, lack of shelter, flogging, hunger, and disease. 8. Cannibalism. Cannibalism was widespread in parts of the Free State area when the state was established, and the colonial administration seems to have done little to suppress it, sometimes rather tolerating it among its own auxiliary troops and allies. During the Congo-Arab War in 1892 to 1894, there were reports of widespread cannibalization of the bodies of defeated combatants by the Batetela allies of the Belgian commander Francis Danis. After a brutally suppressed rebellion that followed the completion of the war, a young Belgian officer described the subsequent consumption of the victims' bodies as horrible but exceedingly useful and hygienic. Officially, cannibalism was outlawed in the force publique and even punishable by death. When sending out punitive expeditions against villages unwilling or unable to fulfill the government's exorbitant rubber quota, Free State officials nevertheless repeatedly turned a blind eye both to arbitrary killings of those considered guilty as well as to the cannibal feasts celebrated by native soldiers that sometimes followed. In various cases, they even handed captives, including infants and old women, over to their soldiers or local allies, implicitly or even explicitly allowing them to kill and eat them. Generally, most Free State officials seem to have had little interest in stopping cannibal customs. One of them, Guy Burroughs, wrote that when he was stationed near the Mongala River, he and his colleagues were well aware that scores of slaves were being sold to supply meat to the people on the other side of the river. But that, to his regret, neither the state nor the private companies active in the area did anything to suppress this deadly trade in slaves for the shambles, instead wholly focusing on the profitable rubber extraction. Similar reports exist for other regions. Another time, while stationed in Riba, today Lokandu, in the eastern Maniema region, Burroughs rescued a young slave boy from becoming the pièce de résistance of a banquet planned by his master. It turned out that the local corporal had been aware of the planned banquet, but had not considered it worthy of mention because the same thing had often occurred in the neighboring villages, and the white men at the post had never bothered about it. Eventually, growing scrutiny of Leopold's regime led to a popular campaign movement centered in the United Kingdom and the United States to force Leopold to renounce his ownership of the Congo. In many cases, the campaigns based their information on reports from British and Swedish missionaries working in the Congo. The first international protest occurred in 1890, when George Washington Williams, an American, published an open letter to Leopold about abuses he had witnessed. In a letter to the United States Secretary of State, he described conditions in the Congo as crimes against humanity, thus coining the phrase, which would later become key language in international law. Public interest in the abuses in the Congo Free State grew sharply from 1895, when the Stokes Affair and reports of mutilations reached the European and American public, which began to discuss the Congo question. To appease public opinion, Leopold instigated a commission for the protection of natives, composed of foreign missionaries, but made few serious efforts at substantive reform. In the United Kingdom, the campaign was led by the activist and pamphleteer Edmund Dean Morel after 1900, whose book, Red Rubber, 1906, reached a mass audience. Notable members of the campaign included the novelists Mark Twain, Joseph Conrad, and Arthur Conan Doyle, as well as Belgian socialists such as Emile van der Velde. In May 1903, a debate in the British House of Commons led to the passing of a resolution in condemnation of the Congo Free State. A few days later, the British consul in the town of Boma, Roger Casement, began touring the Congo to investigate the true extent of the abuses. He delivered his report in December, and a revised version was forwarded to the Free State authorities in February 1904. Morel's campaign methods included using newspaper accounts, pamphlets, books, eyewitness testimony, and pictures of victims that came from missionaries to convey the story of horror in the Congo Free State. As a result of Morel's campaign, the Congo Reform Association, CRA, was established in 1904 to promote reform of the Congo Free State. In 1908, under the pressure of the CRA and other international groups, the Belgian government took control of the Congo Free State from Leopold and renamed it the Belgian Congo. In closing, echoes of screams still hang heavy in the Congolese air, a chilling chorus of a nation punished not for crimes, but for the misfortune of riches beneath its soil. In Leopold's twisted regime, hands became currency, severed not for theft, but for the shortfall of rubber. The Congolese spirit, though wounded, refuses to be crushed. Let the memory of their suffering not be a shroud of despair, but a torch guiding us towards a world where exploitation is not rewarded, and human dignity is the only currency worth collecting. That brings us to the end of this video segment. Did you learn a thing or two? Tell us what you think in the comment section below, and we shall be delighted to pick from your thoughts. Also, don't forget to support our works by hitting that like button in front of you. Share with families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to help in building the rising membership of this channel. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you for watching.